Hello and welcome to episode 82 of TBR, the To Be Read podcast, where we talk about the books we love and the topics that interest us. I'm Patrick Stemp, and with me as always is Michael Ronn. How are you, Michael?
Great, Patrick. How are you this week?
Good. And John L. Monk. How are you, John?
I am doing great.
New camera, new setup. Looks good.
Yeah.
Got a new camera.
Yep. And welcome back from the holidays. Hope you guys had a good Christmas.
Yeah.
I did.
We're coming up on New Year, and so this week we're going to talk about our top reads over the past year, the books we've enjoyed the most. And before we get to that, we will do our roundtable and talk about what we've been reading over the last week. So, John, you want to go first?
Sure. Nothing new. I'm actually I got back into Aaron Sykes' novel Gods of Chicago. I'm starting to run into some gods. It's pretty cool. About 50% through that. Hope to be done this week. It's a long book. It really is. And then I have to pick up his second book, which I kind of agreed to beta read. So nothing new in that respect. I guess that's it for the books I'm reading. I'm not reading a lot of books.
Okay, Michael, what about you?
Yeah, I finished How to Work a Room finally by Susan Ronn, and loved it. Thought it was a great book. I don't really need to go into it that much because I've talked about it for the last 3 weeks, but I did finish it, and all in all, the final verdict is that I would recommend it if anyone is looking to enhance their people skills, so to speak. And
okay.
I read that and jumped right into another book in kind of a similar category by an author called Patrick King, and that's called Inspire. And it's the art of leadership and persuasion. So if you guys can't sense a theme of all these books I've been reading lately, it's very similar, but it's more. I don't know how to best way to explain it, because every time I've tried to explain it, I come off sounding like an idiot. But the best way I can think of to describe this book is how to develop charisma, right? Because there's that myth of charisma is you're either born with it or you're not born with it. But the idea in his book is that there are certain things that you can do to be intentional about being a leader, and so on and so forth. So
I guarantee you, right now, John is trying to remember how much charisma he has in Fallout.
I was just thinking of those little books you find that give you +1 every time you find them. Mike, what are some of the things that he recommends to sort of get that higher charisma? You know, what are some things?
I mean, put yourself out there. Just understand. Basically, you have to understand that first, it's not that people are born with it. It's that some people have it more than others. It comes easier to them. So it's like writing faster, right? Or writing a novel, right? Some people it comes easier to them. Other people it takes time to learn. So the key is just to be aware of what your weaknesses are first, and then build on those. But the key is to always just get yourself in front of people and try to avoid the awkward conversation, the awkward silence. And he gives some tips on how to do that as well. So that's where I would start, is just to put yourself out there and then to minimize the awkward conversations, awkward silences, and knowing when somebody's not interested in you, and so on and so forth.
Okay,
so
I gotta get
I
this
would recommend that. Yeah, he's like he's really interesting because he's like the Steve Scott of like the personal relationship world. Like he's got like a ton of books, and they're all on very focused topics. Like he's got one book on charisma specifically. He's got another book on leadership. He's got another book on like speed dating, and like he's got this market cornered, which is another reason I was like, oh, I'll check this out because I love Steve Scott's books. So it's like, oh, if he's the Steve Scott of social relationships, then I'm in the right place.
Has he got a psychology degree? And by the way, if I'm kind of yielding back the balance of my time, since I didn't really talk that much, but I'm curious.
He doesn't have a psychology degree, but he does have a book called, I think it's called The Art and Science of Likability or something like that, which is kind of interesting.
Cool.
So I haven't read that one, but apparently he's got like a lot of data and science or sciencey stuff in there to kind of back it up.
So he does the research and stuff.
Yeah, he does the research, but he's also like like a social consultant. So like, I don't know. The only thing I can he's kind of like Hitch, right? Like if you're
Right.
wanting
Yeah.
dating advice, he gives you that advice. But if you're also wanting like advice on how to do better at work, right, or how to build relationships with people that you work with or your family, that sort of thing, that's his niche.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah. How about you, Patrick? What are you gonna read?
Well, let's see. I didn't finish anything this week. I've kind of been bouncing back and forth amongst a bunch of stuff. I finally, excuse me, picked up Wonder Book. It's been sitting on the shelf for a while. That's the Jeff Vandermeer book, which I think we've
Nice.
talked about a little bit before. I'm reading, 2, 3 pages a day, just kind of working my way through that. It's a very thick, heavy kind of book to get through with lots of essays and articles on fiction and writing and just the art and the craft, and it's a very cool book. I started reading the Back to the Future Ultimate Visual History. It's this
Nice.
massive tome. As I was saying before the show, I grabbed after Christmas on Boxing Day. I picked up got some good deals on some stuff, so I picked up all 3 movies. And this visual history. The book is amazing. I mean, they went back through all their old notes, production stills. The inserts in it are really cool. There's like a flip picture of his family from the first movie, where his brother and sister are sort of disappearing. The Save the Bell Tower flyer is in there. All kinds of cool stuff. So I'm kind of reading through that as I rewatch the movies. It's been a few years. I've been reading A Cool Breeze on the Underground by Don Winslow. This is a book that Johnny B. Truant actually mentioned on Self Publishing Podcast not too long ago that he was reading, so I checked out the sample, and it was interesting enough for me to download the whole thing and check it out. I'll have more on that when I'm done reading it. I also am about 30% of the way through The Misenchanted Sword by Lawrence Watt Evans, which I think John
Yes.
recommended.
Yes.
I really enjoy the writing style in this book. So far in the story, there's a scout who's sort of been trapped behind enemy lines and lost and trying to find his way back to his army. He comes across a wizard, gets the wizard into some trouble, and the wizard, sort of in an effort to get rid of him, enchants his sword for him and kind of sends him on his way. And so he's dealing with this strange sword that he doesn't really quite understand how it works. And so I'm at a point now where he's just kind of made his way back to his own army, and I'll find out where it's going to go from there.
Cool.
And the other book I've been checking out is 5 Editors Tackle the 12 Fatal Flaws of Fiction Writing by 5 editors. I'm not going to, I don't have their names in front of me. This is a book that was mentioned on, I think they just interviewed one of the authors on Self-Publishing Answers. So Nick Thacker and Kevin Tomlinson, and is it Justin Sloan? I'm pretty sure that's where I was listening to that, so that sounded interesting. It's I'm 2 or 3 fatal flaws in, and they're pretty basic stuff so far, like God, I can't even remember. Kind of blazed through them because they weren't anything that we probably haven't read in other books before, but it is interesting to see 5 separate editors, sort of their take on it. Just things like not info dumping, starting your story in the right place, that kind of stuff. So it's an interesting read. I'll have to figure out if there's anything sort of really new that I got out of it that I wasn't already aware of, but I'll report back on that as well when I'm done reading it.
Cool.
That's it. So sort of a lot of little bits and pieces of different things this week.
I'm really surprised that you're reading The Misenchanted Sword. Whenever I recommend books to people, they normally don't read them. So I know it's a funny thing. But if you get through it and you like it, I mean, you have a whole world of books that are, he didn't have tons of them, but he's maybe 10 or so different books in that world from different characters' perspectives, with cameos from guys and girls from the other books. And the thing is he always writes really fun and interesting characters. And I don't know if he did it in The Misenchanted Sword, but in other books he puts more humor into his story. I forget about the first book though.
Nothing, laugh out loud in this one, but I do like that. It's a nice, easy writing style. So that's our reading for the week. Reading for the week. I don't have any news. I don't know if you guys do, but I thought we would also mention. We talked briefly, I think, last week that we might be doing sort of a shared monthly read in 2016, and I think we've decided to pull the trigger on that. So in January, we're going to read The Rook by Daniel O'Malley. This is a book that I read several years ago. I mean, when it first came out. So it'll be a reread for me, and I think a first time through for both of these guys.
Mm-hmm.
I've been waiting for the sequel to this book, Stiletto, to come out for like a year and a half. It keeps getting pushed back, and hopefully it's supposed to come out, I think, in June or July of this year, and hopefully it doesn't get pushed back anymore. Then I think in February we're going to read The Zodiac Legacy, Convergence by Stan Lee, and I think a couple other guys too. And it is the Stan Lee you're thinking of. And that was suggested by Amber, our listener, so thank you, Amber. We're going to check that one out. And then in March, we're going to read, I think, John's favorite book of all time, if not one of his top 10, Midshipman's Hope by David Feintuch. Is that how you say that last name?
Yeah.
And then it'll be Michael's turn to pick something, and I don't know if you had something in mind, Michael, but if you do, it'll be a surprise to us. Do you have something in mind yet, or are you going to wait?
Not yet. I've still been mulling it over because I'm trying to decide if I want to do something that you guys have, because I read some pretty crazy stuff. So, do I want to do something that I like that I want to share with you guys, or do I want to do it completely blind too? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've got a couple months to figure it out.
Yeah, till April.
So let's go. Sorry, were there any sort of news items that popped out at you this week?
Not from a publishing industry perspective. It's been pretty slow these last 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
There hasn't really been enough for my Author Level Up channel from a news perspective. So no, other than I guess in France, Amazon finally had to rebrand the Kindle Unlimited. I don't know if you guys are following this, but Kindle Unlimited was ruled illegal in France.
I heard about that.
Because it violated France's price-fixing laws. So Amazon rebranded it. It's now called Kindle Subscription Kindle, and it's still a monthly fee, but there's some different stipulations with it that apparently are supposed to make it legal now. So,
you can only borrow $10 a month or something? Or?
No, I don't remember what the particulars were, but it was almost like splitting hairs. France has some really crazy laws with price fixing. So that was really the biggest thing I noticed the last couple of weeks. But
okay. So we can move into our topic, and we were going to talk about the top books we read this year. I don't know how you guys sort of set yours up. I did mine in sort of by category. I didn't. I think last year I did, top 10 through 1. This year I kind of realized that I had books in a lot of different areas and went with, horror, best graphic novel, that kind of stuff. How did you guys put your lists together?
I just did what I remember.
I kind of did that too, just 1 through 10.
Okay.
I mean, I have Andy Weir on the bottom. Oh, that's a spell. But he's not on the bottom. He's like way at the top.
Yeah. Bottom meaning number 1 or bottom meaning number 10?
I guess I just threw him there in a spot where you would think I didn't like the book, but I love the book,
So I'm curious to see what you loved more.
Yeah.
So should we start going through our list then?
Yeah. What do you got?
Sure.
So I'll do mine topic by topic. I think I'll start with I'll go with best sort of graphic novel first, which for me this year is going to have to be Saga volumes 1 through 5.
That was on my list too.
I did read quite a bit of Walking Dead, and Walking Dead is amazing, but Saga I think kind of drew me in more, partially because it was a new story to me, and beautifully illustrated, really interesting story with shifting allegiances throughout, and interesting characters, and just so much engaging things going on that I really loved reading those volumes.
Yeah, that's a great series. I can't wait to see how it evolves.
Mm.
It's one of those things where I'm glad that that we kind of got in on it while it's going, instead of coming at it at the end.
Yep.
It's kind of nice to see it unfold. But yeah, that was on my list too.
Go ahead. What else do you guys have?
I've got one. I know you've read, Patrick, and I think you've read it too, John. Although I'm not sure if you're a fan of it, and that's American Gods, baby.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I loved American Gods.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, I read it. That was one of the first books I read this year. Actually, I was looking at my Goodreads list, and I'm like, wow, I read it in January.
Because it took you 3 or 4 months to read it.
Yeah. It took me a while to finish it, but yeah, awesome. Like it. I mean, I was always a fan of Neil Gaiman, but I only knew him from the graphic novel world, right? I didn't really know him from novel perspective, and totally made me a fan.
Oh, dude, you got to read Neverwhere.
I got to read Anansi Boys. I haven't done that.
Yeah, that's follow-up, I think, to American Gods.
Which I hear that some people like it more, some people don't like it as much. I don't know, but
I like it less, but the parts I liked just as much, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you know how you didn't like the part in American Gods where they got to the town, which I actually love, by the way, but you didn't like it so much. But,
well, it's not
so
that
there'll be
it just dipped. Like I guess I lost my interest there for a little while until the thing happened that we won't talk about.
How about you, John? What's one of the books on your list?
Okay, so we're going to go one me, one you kind of thing?
Sure.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and just I'll just say The Long Walk. It's on the top of my list.
Okay.
I'll get it over with. I've recently talked about it. This book blew me away so bad I can't even. I'm going to reread it, and a year's not even going to go by. I have to figure out why I liked it so much. It was so dark, and I know you recently reread it. I don't usually like stories where kids get hurt. I mean, who likes that? But these were kids that had sort of stuck it out there and said, "Hey, I'm an adult," or did something very adult, or it's not adult in the sense of it's kind of stupid, but it's like kids going to war. You're a warrior now, so even though you're a kid.
Oh, I had The Long Walk on my list as well, and for me it was sort of under the heading of best reread of the year.
Right.
And the reason I even have that on there is because normally that slot, if there is one, would be filled by Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. And that is definitely still up on the top of my books, because I don't often reread books. But Good Omens has long been one, up there with Ender's Game, as a book that I enjoy revisiting every once in a while, and Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide. But it had been years since I'd read The Long Walk, and it was definitely for me my favorite sort of reread book of the year. Go ahead, Michael. What else do you have?
All right, I have the 2015 Writers' Tax Workshop. I don't know if I talked to you guys about this one or not. I don't know if I mentioned it on the show, but it's by E.M. Lindley. And in January, at least here in the States, you got to do your taxes, right? And so this year was the first year where I actually had to file a Schedule C return because of my author business. And so I got to January and realized, holy crap, I have no idea what the heck I'm supposed to do. And so I started looking up books, like author taxes, and this is the only one that popped up. But boy, it was really good. I guess this person is an accountant and has worked, filing taxes, and basically gives her perspective on, things that you need to do to mitigate your tax liability. And you could call it dry, maybe, but I thought it was very enlightening and definitely changed some of the ways that I keep track of my business. So that was definitely a notable book for me this year.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to pick that up actually. Let me think. What's next? Okay, so, and I've talked about this before. The Broken Clock by P.T. Hilton, 3 in his Deadlock trilogy. Now, I read book 1 and I liked it, and I thought parts of it were amazing, and I thought other parts were like, this is good. I didn't really think any parts of it were bad in book 1 or book 2 for that matter. They were just like, yeah, I want to buy the next. And if I didn't know PT, I would have bought the next. And I think that's kind of a good compliment. But book 3 blew me away. He wrote his ass off. He finished the trilogy like a boss. He he didn't flub it. He didn't screw it up. He didn't write another book just to make some money. He killed it, and that's why it's on my list.
We need to put that in the back of his book. He finished his trilogy like a boss. John L. Mark.
Yeah, so I was so surprised because it's a big worry of mine that I would finish a trilogy or something on a flat note, or anybody would say, "Oh, you're just sort of cranking them out." And in his case, he was inspired and he just did it.
Awesome.
You have to get that a better blurb though. You have to start that off by saying it's like if Stephen King said he finished the trilogy like a boss, and then he could put that on the back of his book. That part of your quote. Stephen King said he finished the book like a boss. Got to be smart with your quotes. So then, speaking of Stephen King, I've got a horror book on my list, not one of his though. The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. So for horror reads this year, that's I think definitely on the top of my list. I think it's been doing very well. It's been working its way around for past. I think it's probably a 2014 release, if I'm not mistaken, and it was recommended to us by David Wright, and just fantastic horror zombie story. Great point of view. Kind of keeps you guessing as to what's going on throughout the story, and it was a lot of fun without being terribly gory.
Yeah, I second that. That was great.
Who's next?
So, I guess am I up next, or is?
I think John.
You are. Oh,
John?
Okay.
Okay.
Lost
track.
All right, so I'm on. All right, so this one was an audiobook, but it's by David McCullough or something like that. He's apparently a pretty big kind of author. He wrote The Wright Brothers, and it's a documentary. It's a biography about the Wright brothers, and he reads it in his audiobook, and he did a really good job. You really enjoy it. My wife and I listened to it on the drive down, either the drive down or from Texas on one of our trips to visit her mom, and basically, you would think the Wright brothers are like, oh, they invented the airplane, took some grainy photographs, and the rest is history. Well, they had a really rich and interesting history. They were meeting princes and princesses and counts, and they were going all around the world, and they have all these interesting quirks, and they were, they were sort of in competition with a bunch of contemporaries, and they were beating the pants off of them. And they were they were just really, really smart, and they're for example, weird things like their father was very, very religious and he was a minister, but he had all these books on natural selection and all these other types of sciencey things, and you would think, wow, what's this religious guy, this repressed maybe seeming religious guy doing with all this stuff? And it was because nobody fits into a cookie cutter category kind of thing the way that you would expect from maybe a Facebook meme or something. So there was just so much about these brothers and their family that was very enlightening. They were just brilliant. The scientific method just dripped off of them.
Did you?
The United States government was in competition with them. As a matter of fact.
That's what I was going to ask you about. Have you heard Simon Sinek's TED Talk on? I think I can't remember the name of the TED Talk, but it's basically Start With Why.
Yeah.
Because he talks about that competition, about the guy that was kind of working for the government and had all this money behind him, and the Wright brothers were kind of just doing it on their own for the love of the science. And
Yes.
one of the things he talks about is the fact that once they were successful, this guy working for the government or whatever, who was doing it for the money and the prestige, rather than trying to kind of lift them up and help them take what they had already done and make it better, he just quit. He's like, well, I wasn't the first one, so I'm done.
Well, more than that, he came back later and he tried to sabotage them. He tried to say things like, "Well, we put a stronger rocket or or engine or whatever on the end of our original failed attempt, and it flew, 200 feet. So technically, you didn't get the first working flying machine. Ours worked fine. It just needed a stronger engine, and all these other stupid things." And it's like, yeah, and if that guy that made the flappy wings thing had just had a stronger engine, his flappy wings invention would have soared 500 feet in the air before coming crashing to the ground. It's like, I'm sorry, you didn't get it. You spent $50,000, which is like $1 billion nowadays, back, to beat the Wright brothers, and they got some glue and some string and went out to some place with, it was like a horrible mess, this area, Kitty Hawk, flies as big as hamsters and everything else, and they did it. So anyway, the Wright brothers, David McCullough.
Cool.
Cool.
Go ahead, Michael.
All right. I had a book. Next up was a book that really surprised me. I kind of did a 180 with my reading, and that is Nora Roberts' Born in Fire, book 1 of the Concannon Sisters trilogy, I believe. And it was the first. I guess I've read romance novels before, but this was the first one that really just grabbed me, right? And I kind of surprised myself, like, with the romance, but it was part of a project I was doing, and it's about an artist whose father is ill and passes away, and she falls in love with a businessman, and it's a classic conflict of head versus the heart. And can't recommend it enough. The writing was just gorgeous. The story was great. I loved the heroine, and yeah, it definitely made me a romance reader.
Okay.
Wow.
So next on my list, let's see. I'm gonna go with nonfiction next. Nonfiction, but not writing books. Well, that'll be a different topic. So for just general nonfiction, The Brain by David Eagleman.
Okay.
I think this is another book that was recommended actually by David Wright that he was reading. It's also a series on I want to say PBS, but I could be wrong. So it's a mini series, a documentary. It's also a book, and I haven't seen the TV show, but the book is fantastic. It's great insight into how the brain develops, about memory and how that works over time. It's just a great sort of insight into who we are as meat puppets or whatever you want to call it, and so I really got a lot out of that read. It helped me understand myself a bit better, I think, and just sort of people in general. And it was a lot of fun too. It wasn't too wordy and deep and sciencey. It really is sort of the science for the common man, and I enjoyed it a great deal. So, nice. John, what else do you have?
All right. So, okay, there was a regulars. Okay, Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield. Now, I read his The War of Art, and it was like a real eye-opener. It's sort of self-help for writers and maybe creatives or even like business-type folks, people who want to create, or people who want to live their life without thinking hierarchically, like who's above me and who's below me, or when am I going to get my rewards from all the work I did. And he turns that around and he says something, I guess it's timeless, but this is the first time that I had encountered it, which is you're not really entitled to the fruits of your labor. Obviously we are. If we write something, we should get paid for it, I guess. But he's thinking about it a little bit differently. He's saying you're not entitled to like your $1 million. The only thing you can count on from your work is the joy of the work, And if you think about it that way, it's something, he's right, it's something that can't be taken away from you. You did the work, you created this cool thing, you can enjoy that. If you can enjoy that, then you're basically kind of one step forward to spiritual awesomeness, I guess, and happiness. Well, Turning Pro is sort of like the counterpart to that, and it's like a continuation of it. It's written sort of in the same way. It's got these 2 to 3 page little sections about the various ways that you go from being an amateur who maybe writes a book to make your $1 million and go, screw it. And versus another person who, writes a book, makes his $50, writes another, gets another 50, and then just keeps doing that for 10 years, and the next thing you know, he's Hugh Howey. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually kind of editing his book a little bit by saying the Hugh Howey part. He didn't even say that much. He just said, you write because it's more like you write because you enjoy the work. That's it.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay.
All right. Next up in mine is also a nonfiction book that is not writing, although I guess writers would find interest in it, and that is Thinking with Type by Ellen Lupton. And this is an interesting book. It's basically the history of fonts. And I know that sounds really dry, but it was actually one of the more interesting books that I read because it talks about like common fonts that are used in like ebooks now, or fonts that are used in ads. But it talks about why they were developed and what the reason for them was. And so like Baskerville, for example, was developed to be a readable font in the 1700s, I think, in relation to all the fonts that came before it that were kind of cursive and more handwriting based. This was meant to be consumed on a paperback book or a hardcover book so that you could read it better and easier. And he got a lot of crap when he developed that font because people thought, this is sinful. It's it's not, because handwriting books originated from the church, right? They were originally scribed, and so that had that long storied tradition, and he introduced this new font that was very modern, and he got a lot of crap for it, but guess what? Baskerville is one of the default fonts on the Kindle today. That's how long it survived, and that's how long it's been useful. And so they talk about all kinds of different fonts, and there's really pretty pictures of, the letters and like the different fonts and serifs, and I just thought it was really, really an interesting history book. So good to know if you're designing covers or if you want to be able to look at a book cover and know why it works the way it works or why certain fonts pair better with others. A good book to pick up.
I remember that episode where you talked about it, and I thought it was pretty cool. I may have to pick that up.
Yeah, I definitely recommend the paperback just because there are a lot of images in it. But it is available as an ebook, but it's quite expensive.
Okay. So I think next up on my list, we've read quite a bit of YA since we started the show, and this year I'm going to go with Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson. That was a great sort of superhero, young adult read with the epics. So these people who have somehow, for some strange reason, come upon superpowers that, when they use them, make them not very nice people. And the first book was a fast, fun, just an excellent read. The second book, Firefight, was also very good. And I'm looking forward to the third book, and the third and last book, I guess, in the series, Calamity, which comes out in just sometime in February. So I'm looking forward to that.
That sounds fun. Actually, I like that.
Hey, John, you got another one?
I forgot it was my turn. I love superhero types of stories. So. Okay, The End of the World as We Knew It by Nick Cole. He's a sort of an famous indie author. I particularly liked it because I'm on a post-apocalyptic kick, I guess, and I found it kind of inspiring. It's written in a number of different tenses, and I actually beta read the book, but nonetheless, I still mention it because it was really good, and it's about zombies. It's like the end of the world. There's zombies. He writes. I'm not sure how many zombie books he's written. I actually don't read zombie books. I like Walking Dead. They do all the imagination stuff for me, and I don't have to struggle too hard. But generally speaking, I don't really read zombie books. But I like this one, and I remember, just like P.T. Hilton's book, it had an absolutely killer ending. And if you like a book with a killer ending, I definitely recommend it, especially if you like zombie books. So.
Okay. Michael?
Okay. So I know we're coming up kind of here on the end, but one of the books that I had that I really enjoyed is one I'm sure you guys have read, and I'm kind of kicking myself that I didn't read it sooner in life, and that's Jurassic Park.
Mm-hmm.
Love them. Love. That's one where I love the movie, but I'd never read the book, and just happened to find it on sale and picked it up and just fell in love with it.
Yep.
Like, just, the book is a million times better than the movie, but the movie was pretty darn good. So, but yeah, that was probably I'd probably say that was my favorite novel I read this year.
Okay, it's a good
It'd
one.
be at the top of my list.
Let's see. I'll rip through a couple more here since we're coming up on getting close to 45 minutes probably. So my favorite comedy read of the year was That's Not How You Wash a Squirrel by David Thorne. I won't go into that too much. We talked about him quite a bit last week, if anyone wants to go back to that one. But he's an essayist and comedian, or a humorist rather, on the web, and he's got like a whole bunch of books that are sort of collections of his blog posts and email exchanges with people, and then he's just great. He's great for a laugh. And then for my favorite children's book, I'm going with The Day the Crayons Came Home by Drew Daywalt, which was a follow-up to another book in that series, and it was just it's just a lot of fun. If you've got young kids, Drew Daywalt's crayon books are fantastic.
Cool.
You guys go ahead. I've only got a couple left.
Okay, I'm actually just going to plow through mine. I have a section of awesome indies that I read this year, but I read Russell Blake's Jet. Talked about it like an episode or two ago. Great little thing, action adventure. The Martian, which everybody knows about by now, so whatever. It's awesome. Blew my mind. Very funny, very interesting book. The three books that I read from the Awesome Indie List, which is my little contest on, I don't know if you call it a contest, but basically I go and try to find indies that deserve the credit that they're not getting or something like that. And one of them was by E.J. Robinson called Robinson Crusoe 2244, which is kind of like Robinson Crusoe in the future with this one kid who's got to go into a blasted sort of wasteland of America and have adventures and stuff. The next one was Chimeras by E.E. Georgie. She's a geneticist, an actual geneticist. It's a hard-boiled sort of like crime, thriller, sci-fi. Excuse me. And it was really good. I loved the writing style. I loved all the science. And the last one, which I'll mention, is called Magic Times by Harvey Click. Now, Harvey Click is one of the best indie authors that you probably haven't heard of. He writes horror, and horror doesn't sell particularly well, I guess, for indie authors. But he does it anyway, and he does it amazingly. This particular book wasn't horror; it was sort of like a literary fantasy about this kind of like idiot who kind of gets involved in sort of magical mayhem with a bunch of competing powers in this southern town, and basically he stumbles through it, and I won't tell you how it ends or anything like that because it'd be bad, but basically I loved every inch of that book. It's called Magic Times. It's by Harvey Click. Definitely pick it up.
Okay.
Cool.
Michael, you have a few final reads you want to mention?
Yeah. I had Techniques of the Selling Writer by Dwight V. Swain. It was a book recommended to us by Sean Platt when he was on earlier this year. Just a good all-around craft book that I would recommend. Also had Consider Phoebus by Ian M. Banks, which was a great space opera novel. Kind of the Culture series, I believe, is what launched the space opera genre, or at least made it what it is today. And then I also had Flight, which was a graphic novel of stories that are all based on some element of flight. And then the last one was Old Man's War by John Scalzi.
Mm-hmm.
Needs no description. How fantastic it was.
It was awesome.
You gotta read some more Scalzi.
Yeah.
Check out Red Shirts and maybe Little Fuzzy.
Yeah, I want to read everything he's done. Old Man's War was awesome.
Mm-hmm. So the last couple I had on my list, so two different sections. First, superhero, because the other one was under YA, Brandon Sanderson's book, but this is superhero zombies, and I really enjoyed this year X Heroes by Peter Clines. That's the one where a group of superheroes has kind of gathered what they can that's left of humanity and set them up in the Universal Pictures lot in Hollywood, and they're protecting them from the zombie apocalypse while going out and trying to gather supplies and things like that. It was a great series. And then finally, I had my section on the writing books that I read this year, and I've got 3 on here because I'm having it's hard to pick one when they're all about such different topics. So you already mentioned one, Michael, Techniques of the Selling Writer by Dwight V. Swain. That's just an amazing book. I also have Writing into the Dark by Dean Wesley Smith on my list, and I think, you know what, if I had to pick one book that affected me the most this year, I would have to go with that one, I think, because I've always considered myself probably a plotter, and he really opened my eyes to a better way to do that and actually get some work done. So that was a fantastic book. And the last one on my list was The Story Grid by Sean Coyne, which is another just all around just a great craft book, but that one gets a little into the weeds and the details, and it can be a little overwhelming. So it's kind of on the exact opposite spectrum of writing into the dark, for sure.
Exact opposite.
Yeah. So I would put probably Writing into the Dark at the top. I guess I'd probably put Techniques in the middle, because it doesn't get too into the weeds and the nitty-gritty and all the science of everything. It's just like it's just a fantastic book on writing scene and sequel and how that all should work. And I guess I'd put The Story Grid last on that list, but definitely above any of the other writing books that I read this year. Oh,
cool.
That's the end of my list. You guys have wrapped up your lists too?
Yeah.
Good. I think it was a good year for reading. We're looking forward to 2016, and as we said, we've already got 3 books chosen that we're all going to read together and discuss sort of in the first episode of the following month after we read it. And next week, other than those books, I think we're probably going to be talking about just kind of a general overview of the types of things that we're looking forward to reading in 2016 outside of those books that we've already chosen. New releases coming from big authors, hopefully, and whatever. So we'll talk about that next week. In the meantime, thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and thanks for being with us through 2015. It's been a great year, and we're looking forward to continuing the podcast through 2016, and we will talk to you then. Have a great week, guys.
Take care, guys.